The secrecy is incredibly attractive. So basically what Christie's is doing, they are reaching out to their top clients they think might be interested in this particular work. And it could be a handful, maybe two handfuls at most.
I'm Andrew Russeth, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast by Artnet News. Artnet Pro has just released the latest edition of the Artnet Intelligence Report, the year ahead, which has comprehensive statistics about the past year in the auction market and a wide variety of interviews with important players and analysis of what has happened and where we could be headed as an art industry. The cover story is called Dark Mode, and it looks at private auctions. I am thrilled to be joined by Artnet's art detective columnist, Katya Kazakina. Katya, thank you for coming on the podcast.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
It's been a punishing few years for the art market. When we have released these reports over the past couple of years, we have mostly come on to discuss very bad news, a prolonged contraction. Tell us what the report says this time. Is it more bad news? What happened in the data?
I'm much more optimistic this year, and I'm so glad to be here and discuss this. We finally have turned the corner in one way, but the big picture is that the top of the market rebounded last year in 2025, and the total fine art auction sales jumped 13.3% to $11.7 billion in 2025. So that was great news after a few years of downward trajectory. However, just keep in mind that that's still down from the recent peak of $16.6 billion in 2021. So 11.7 billion versus the peak of 16 plus in 2021. But we're seeing kind of this momentum continuing. And actually in London, the sales were up 17% from a year ago. And the Hong Kong sales just now also posted big increases from the previous year. So it seems that the auction market is on the upswing.
Yes, so finally some good news for us to delve into. Maybe then we should do almost a recap of 2025, because I remember the last time we got together for our mid-year intelligence report, this was an especially bleak moment. There were a number of high-profile galleries that had closed. The sales that you're describing, Hong Kong at the end of March, London as well shortly before that, the November sales, they had not yet come, and we were kind of deep in a dark place. So walk us through what happened last year and the trajectory you've seen.
Sure. So, I mean, the trajectory has been bad for a while, like for 3 years. And I think last year was particularly bad because I think that the reality of the contraction really sunk in, and it's been longer than anyone really expected it to be based on the previous financial crisis contraction, which was much shorter. It was kind of like is this the new normal? The sales were down at auctions. The galleries were really struggling and started closing in very alarming numbers. And it was kind of like an existential moment for the art market.
A crisis of confidence for some segment of
huge for many segments, I think. And just people were questioning, is this model even working? You know, on every single level. A major publication asked me to write an op-ed piece about, is this the end of the art market at the end of the year after our intelligence reports came out? And I was like, wait, let me just collect some more data. And then things turned around. So I never ended up writing it, thank God. But it was a really tough year. And then we broke the news that Leonard Lauder's collection is heading to the market. And while Leonard Lauder, he died in June of last year, and he obviously is one of the biggest philanthropists of our time. He was known for giving over $1 billion worth of art of his astonishing collection to the Metropolitan Museum in 2013. Less known was that he also had these masterpieces of Austrian and German Expressionism, an area that was much more associated with his brother Ronald Lauder, who has founded the Neue Gallery. Anyway, we found out that he has these 3 phenomenal Klimts, or just lovely Klimts. You know, I mean, I don't know how phenomenal they are compared to what's out there, but they had his provenance. And as far as the market goes, that was like A++. That's what everybody wants, supposedly. And so that came to the market. And, we talked about it, Andrew. We kind of agree on this, right? That Leonard Lauder saved the art market.
Yeah. So you break the story. Sotheby's gets the Lauder collection and puts them up in New York in the new Breuer headquarters for Sotheby's. And things go wild.
And also just to note that, of course, the Breuer building is the former home of the Whitney Museum, whose biggest patron was Leonard Lauder. So they absolutely had to get it. As always in these cases, heading into the sale, there were a lot of kind of evil tongues, and they were saying, well, Sotheby's gave so much money for this collection, definitely outbid Christie's. Are they going to lose money? What's going to happen? The stakes were super high for them. They opened the Breuer building with the Lauder collection. It was a perfect marketing moment. And they did take risk.
Huge results. The main picture made, it was 236
million, just doubling the estimates. And there were 6 bidders above $100 million level, with competition. It was really one of those extraordinary auction moments that it's now only second to the Da Vinci. Salvador Mundi, which sold for $450 million almost 10 years ago already.
Right. It's astonishing that that was so long ago, and we had a kind of drought of these major pictures.
Yeah, nothing came close.
Yeah. Tell us more about the reaction in the art world. I mean, you said that Lauder's collection really saved the market. What did you hear out there from people reacting to that?
It felt like it was just a collective exhale.
Yes.
It was just oh my God. It was really palpable. Just the relief that it brought to the market. Just to backtrack a little bit, not only auction were down for several seasons for a couple of years, but last year, I remember a moment maybe about a year ago or heading into May sales, and especially after May sales, there's this, I don't know if it's a limiting belief, it's a belief, it's a very strong belief in the market that recent declines are a result of supply, not demand. And that if presented with these indisputed masterpieces, the collectors, the buyers, the investors will rise to the occasion and they will pay extraordinary prices for these works. I think that last year, at least in my mind, that perception kind of started to crack a little bit. And in May, you remember, of course, Sotheby's got Sheldon Solo's bust by Giacometti that was estimated at $70 million, and it wasn't backed by a guarantee, and it failed to sell. And it was just a huge flop. I mean, Sotheby's didn't necessarily lose money on that because they didn't pay for it. But for the market, it was just a horrible optics, because that was supposedly one of those great works of art. And the fact that nobody, stepped up to bid for it was really bad. And the question kind of that lingered over the market, is it really true? Do exceptional works of art really command those prices? Or is there something bigger happening in the market? Maybe it's, we've written so much about the transgenerational wealth and the changing of taste and the changing of generational kind of guard. What does it mean for the art market? Maybe the new buyers and new wealthy people just don't care for the Klimts and the Giacomettis and Pollocks and Picassos. Maybe they want cause, and maybe they want people, and who knows? So I think that there was so much writing on the Lauder sale because that was really quintessential kind of old taste, right?
It was a make or break moment for that sensibility.
100%. And the fact that it did so well, not just one work, there were 3 Klimts, and they all did very well. And, that was a huge boost of confidence. And I talked to, remember very shortly, I called Jeffrey Deitch, who's,
I'm glad you're bringing this up because that to me was such an exciting moment. Jeffrey Deitch, longtime dealer, advisor, his reaction when you talked to him was really interesting.
He was so excited. He was just everything is forgotten. We're flying to the moon. Lauders to Klimts to the rescue. There was a sense now we could sell anything.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
We're good.
And that's my next question. I really am curious. a number of months have passed since November. We've had these pretty solid results in London, Hong Kong. We've had some fairs. And is that energy at that top level translating to an improvement at lower tiers, at lower price points? Do you have a sense of that?
Undetermined.
Yeah,
I
too
think we
soon to
can't
say.
say. Too soon to say. I
Yeah.
think the galleries are still on the line, and I think it's really unclear. I think that when we talk about the market, we really do need to distinguish between the segments. Like emerging art, like I think it's still not great. Like I think there's a huge flight towards blue chip, and that's why we decided to look at that very, very top of the market and how it behaves, right, for this intelligence report. Because in the past couple of editions, we looked at the galleries. And, of course, with our data, what was interesting, right, it showed that when we broke down, right, the price brackets, the biggest increase for the year from 24 to 25 was that very, very top of the market, the works that sold for 10 million or more.
Yes.
Right. So that bracket increased by 36%. And previous year, it dropped the most. It was clear, like nobody was selling.
There was very little,
Very
as
little.
you pointed out.
Right. And so that's kind of where these private transactions come into play.
Exactly. A perfect segue into your cover story. In that rarefied realm, dark mode, you looked at the world of private auctions, which to me was almost entirely new. It's been written about here and there little bits, but you have put together a comprehensive look at how different auction houses, and not just auction houses, dealers, other groups, are creating these private auction mechanisms to sell work at this very rarefied level. Just delve into it for us. Tell us what you found out when you started digging.
It's so fascinating. I've been obsessing over this for a couple of years. The first time I heard about this private auction, and I think, Andrew, that was pretty much like when you started at Artnet. And I remember we haven't seen each other in a long time.
Yeah.
You were in Korea.
Yeah.
And remember we met in like January.
Yeah.
I was covering the Rybolovlev trial. He sued Sotheby's and there was big trial. And Dmitry Rybolovlev, he was one of the biggest collectors of the 2010s. And he amassed this major collection of masterpieces with the help of a dealer advisor, Freeport operator Yves Bouvier, and then very famously sued him. Russian billionaire sued his advisor for overcharging him on all of these transactions. And we've covered it to great detail. And where I'm going with this is that in January of 2024, this trial was happening.
You were downtown at the courthouse.
I was at the courthouse and we met.
We went to Nishnash, I believe.
Yes,
got
we had a
falafel, baklava, maybe.
Exactly.
Shout out Nishnash. Phenomenal.
I know. And Dmitry was testifying like that day or the day before, whatever. And then this news broke that he was also just recently sold one of the few remaining works, this crown jewels of his collection, a Rothko, in a private auction. I was just so surprised. But here he was in the courtroom in New York testifying. And at the same time, he was like clandestinely selling this masterpiece through Christie's in a private sale. And I was like, private auction? Like, I know about private sales, but private auction? Like, what the hell is that? And it just really got my attention. And I was like, what are these private auctions? Like, who bids in them? How are they set up? Of course, nobody would tell me anything about them. It's a secret world. And of course, the art detective has to know. And so it just was like this little needle that kept needling me for a while. And then people are familiar with this Rothko painting because it is on the cover of Rothko Catalog Raisonné. So
they've seen this
they've
one.
Seen this
is
one.
a classic. Yeah.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. And so it's supposedly sold for $195 million, which is a huge price for Rothko, whose auction record is 86 million. So huge price, and it was very mysterious.
One thing I find really interesting about this is the general public. I think many listeners have a sense of how the public auction works. Whether you go to Sotheby's or Christie's or Phillips, they largely work in the same way. Of course, each house has a few intricacies, perhaps around fees, but what you found out is that there are just a variety of models that have been adopted by different houses, different dealers. Can you walk us through some of the things that people are doing and how they're differentiating their approach to this?
Sure. So Christie's kind of pioneered this model of this private auction. And actually, the Rothko was not the first. It started in 2021 with a Frida Kahlo self-portrait called Me and My Parrot from 1941. And it sold for more than $150 million.
Wow.
My understanding of that sale is that it was a family from South America, and they came to actually Sotheby's. A private sale was considered, and they came to Sotheby's for advice, and then came, I guess, to Christie's just to see the estimate. And then Christie's turned around and said, well, we can do one better. We can do it better than a private sale. We can do a private auction. Again, nobody will confirm anything, so this is just my reporting. That private auction was so successful for Christie's. They, I don't know if they tripled it or they doubled it, and they got their upside was so humongous that
Nice.
they had
Let's keep doing this.
Let's keep doing this. But obviously, it's not something you can do every day or even every year, perhaps, because for Christie's, and I talked to Adrian Meyer, one of their top executives involved in this, he said that just by definition, a very rare occasion. So they have done, he said, only like a handful of these auctions. So we know of 3.
Okay.
So we know of Frida Kahlo, we know of the Rothko for $195, and then there was also actually Kenny Schachter, Artnet's columnist, wrote that there was a Vincent van Gogh painting Zouave that sold for about $200 million. So we know of those 3. If somebody knows of more, please let us know.
Write to Katya.
Right.
I think she'll take DMs as well.
I'll take DMs.
We can get you her phone number. This is really fascinating background about this thing that, as you said, has been for Christie's wildly successful. And I can imagine some reasons why this might be appealing to people. Discretion for various reasons. But you found, I think, there were many things that were attractive about this to bidders and sellers. What did you find out? Why are people doing this?
The secrecy is incredibly attractive. So basically what Christie's is doing, they are reaching out to their top clients they think might be interested in this particular work. And it could be a handful, maybe 2 handfuls at most. I think the number is like between 4 and 9 people. So these are the wealthiest, the most sophisticated buyers in the world. And they're being kind of invited to this very secret, very exclusive event. It has all the bells and whistles of the top art auction. So there are books, catalogs published, there's all the research done, obviously. And then Christie's sets its sales room as if for a regular evening auction with specialists on the phones and with video streaming and the whole thing. But there's nobody else in the room, just Christie's staff and all the bidders who commit to bidding. So whoever is in the room is going to bid, which creates this urgency and this competitive dynamics for these alpha people of the world.
Yeah.
And so they don't know obviously who else is there, but they know how many people are there. And so each one gets a protected secured link, can call over the phone or online, and they can bid directly or through their representative or whatever. But sort of you participate in this live auction at the highest level. And so I think the urgency is very important. The competitiveness is very important so they can capture that kind of
So
theater.
for a seller, for a consigner, this is an ideal theater that's being created.
Right. Because also if for some reason it doesn't sell, basically except for these people who are involved, nobody knows it even took place. They don't know what was the estimate. They don't know what is the work unless somebody leaks it. But, it's been pretty tight. Not, bulletproof tight, but it's been, it's taken a while for this information
Not when
to
the art
come
detective
out.
comes to town. Yeah.
Well, And when I talked to Adrian about this, I said, well, like for me as a reporter on the art market who's trying to get this data and this information, I'm like, we've had decades when the art market has become more transparent and we were able to tell better stories. And this is like, it's creating like this alternative universe of these private sales. And he's like, yeah. And that's why everybody wants to do it.
Right.
I thought that it was a con, but he's like, no, it's a huge pro. Like, that's what people want. The only thing that they don't capture, and Adrian agreed with me on this, is that, sometimes, and we've seen it over the years, there's a new entrant into the market, somebody from one of the emerging economies or somebody who wasn't collecting art at that level, just somebody who's not known to the auction house. And this person will stand in the back of the room with the paddle and will set a world record for a Picasso. It has happened. And so they will not know of this person until this person manifests him or herself. And if they don't know, they can't invite that person to the auction. So the new buyers who want to make a mark and who want to get the publicity associated with, like, think about Yusaku Maezawa when he bought the Basquiat, like classic example. He was, billionaire in Japan. Nobody heard of him. And all of a sudden, he became like the best known person in the art world, literally overnight, because he bought the Basquiat for, $110 million at Sotheby's. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be disrespectful to Mr. Maezawa. But my point is that buying these masterpieces at those levels gives people just an incredible publicity.
So one potential downside is some untapped demand. You could leave some money or some bidding energy on the table.
Yeah, you just don't know who you're leaving out. So that's the biggest con.
I'm really interested from the bidder side as well about why it might be appealing to be involved in this. And you talked to Hugo Nathan, who I thought had a really interesting point about this.
Great point. He said, we live in such a world of have and have-nots. There's such a divide that, it may be like tone deaf to be seen both buying and selling art for these outrageous prices.
Yeah, not a great moment.
Not a great moment necessarily to telegraph your extreme wealth in this way. Right. So I think that it is appealing to bidders as well. Nobody will know.
Yeah. To kind of do a behind-the-scenes journalistic question, I mean, when there is this level of secrecy, how did you go about reporting this? To the degree you're able to share, what was your method for finding out about what had happened?
Well, I can't take credit for discovering any of this sales. Unfortunately, the person who broke the news was Jeremy Hodgkin from The Canvas, and Kenny Schachter reported on the other two, and I don't know how they find out. I don't know.
But you push forward the kind of mechanics of,
right, the mechanics.
How these things work.
Well, I think that at this point, I just try to talk to as many people as I can, at the highest level that I can think of, and just compare notes, just like cast a really wide net. That's what I always do about these type of situations, and just take any kernel of reporting of information that I know and just trade it up.
Nice.
Nice. People, they don't give up this information. You kind of have to tell them what you know, and they will give you maybe a little crumb.
Love that.
And then you can build
you bring
on
something
that.
to the table.
Yeah, you have to bring something to the table. But it's very tough to report, and that's the point. That is the point. That's a great selling point, probably for Christie's right now. That it's very hard to get this information. But I think perhaps something else is going on. They decided to talk to me about the process and give some clarity about it, and just how not necessarily successful they've been, but at least to give us the size and the scope of these transactions and how they go about putting them together, because there hasn't been really just a lot of rumors, and we didn't know exactly how they take place. So I hope it was useful to our readers.
Totally. I want to very shortly start looking forward at the May auctions. But before doing that, and also we want to encourage people to go download the report at news.artnet.com. So I don't want you to give everything away, but I think it would be interesting to share a few of the other models you looked at, and some people that are entering into it now, looking at the field.
Yes. So, I was wondering then, does Sotheby's have something comparable? Yeah. And they do and they don't. So they have something that is similar and different. It's called Sotheby's Sealed. And it's based on this idea of sealed bids that people can leave with the auction house and see where it gets them for a particular artwork. Probably the biggest example of that approach Sotheby's had in 2020 when they got to sell collection of Ron Perlman, the Distress collection, and they had a few Giacometti sculptures, this really monumental femme de Venise, spectacular works. So they sold this big femme de Venise sculpture through the sealed bid approach. So people just had to send in their bids, and whoever sent the biggest bid won. And I heard different things about that particular sale. There was, I think, a lot of frustration with it because a lot of people assumed that it was bought by Patrick Drahi,
The owner of
the owner of
Sotheby's.
Sotheby's. And so that kind of dampened the mood a little bit. But, no comment from Sotheby's, obviously. More recently, a couple of years ago, Sotheby's owns RM Sotheby's, the seller, the auctioneer of vintage cars. And they have been dealing sometimes with cars that have very interesting histories or interesting provenance, but difficult to price necessarily, to put the price tag or estimate on. And so they started using these cars, iconic, beautiful vintage cars, in this sealed bid structure. So the price points here are much lower, right? With Christie's, you talk about mostly above 100 million. Here we're talking about, maybe 20 million. It started with cars, and, now they've added jewels, and they tried it with art. But gems, they actually lower price points, very active. Art, not so much. I feel like it's, for some reason, hasn't worked as well with art. And so here the structure is different. They advertise the sale. It's not as secretive, but it's kind of hard to figure out how much these things sell for because they don't keep the prices on the website, but they do keep the information about each of these sealed sales on the website. So there is an amount of secrecy, but not quite to the level of Christie's. But also they sell it the same way. They say, look, if it doesn't sell, nobody knows.
So it can be a real method of price discovery. I mean, it almost sounds a little bit like when authors are selling a book, right? You sometimes do sealed bids, and it allows for some deliberation. It allows for finding out where people stand in a private way.
Right. For publishing a book.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. So it's kind of like that. And when you are participating in that, I was told, is that you see there's almost like a leaderboard, and you see if you are one of 3 top sealed bids, but otherwise you really have no idea how many people are competing or where you are in the process. And so the critics of this model, like they point that out, that from the competitive perspective, it's not quite as maybe enticing as like a completely secret auction.
I see.
But then, of course, this and talking about different models, and then, other people are kind of wising up to that too. So I spoke with Philip Hoffman, whose empire of fine art is expanding. He's trying different models. In one of those models, he partnered with several former Christie's and Sotheby's executives who are now in the private sphere, like as advisory, and they're able to raise capital quite a bit. He said like to $1 billion to guarantee things to, and he's thinking of jumping into this private auction arena if they find the right work, because it has to be the right work. But for him, he's thinking of 10 million plus. So again,
that really elite level,
right? Elite level,
beginning.
Exactly. And one of the people who he has on board is Brad Gorvey, one of the big rainmakers at Christie's formerly, and now a co-owner of a gallery here in Manhattan. And he actually in 2024 staged a secret auction at his gallery, Levy, Gorvey, and Diane in Manhattan. And Michael Chow, a restaurateur and artist, he happened to have had a Francis Bacon painting he wanted to part with. And so they staged this private auction at the gallery of that Bacon, and it's sold for, I guess, like 50 million plus, something like that. So then Brad now has this experience, and maybe I'm sure he'll be involved in whatever model Philip Hoffman and his crew are going to pursue.
It's fascinating. So it's auction houses, it's an advisory, it's a dealer. Everyone is sort of experimenting with this.
The other company that's doing it is Fair Warning. And that's, again, Louis Gouzer, who is this maverick, also a rainmaker formerly at Christie's. And he was the kind of the mastermind behind the Da Vinci sale at Christie's. So, since leaving the auction house, he started his own company. It's called Fair Warning. They use an app to sell art, and they do one artwork at a time. But in the past year, they've done 2 of these sort of secret auctions, and I lead with that anecdote of one of them. for the report of their sale of Brigitte Bardot portrait by Warhol for $16.7 million in November. And that was the top work they have sold. It was kind of secret, very selective, but it was, also a party, and it was by invitation only kind of event, different price point, different level. That result we have on Artnet. So I think the market, all these players, are still trying to figure out like what to report, what not to report. Loic, for example, on Artnet we have 42 of works that they sold. He actually has sold 62, I think.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so he doesn't report all of them. I just feel like from the point of view of the market transparency, it's problematic.
Yeah.
Just all of this is very problematic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if people are interested in these kind of caliber of works, they can find out what is the ceiling, their ways.
I love that you captured this moment, that everything feels in flux, experimental. This happens as maybe we're seeing a rebound in the market. And now we're talking in April and looking at May coming up, the big month, the big week for the sales in New York. We have gotten glimpses of some work that will be coming to auction. There are rumors of others. What can you tell us about New York in May? What should we be looking at? What should we be excited about?
Well, I'm excited about a couple of works from Said Newhouse collection.
Oh.
We broke the news last month about this, but it hasn't been formally announced by Christie's. So Said Newhouse, his estate, has been selling periodically works. A next batch is coming again to Christie's. From what I heard, it was 450 million total. And then the two top works are, there's this really incredible Jackson Pollock, estimated at over 100 million. And then there is also a Brancusi sculpture estimated at $100 million. And both of those levels would be record setting for Pollock and for Brancusi. So that's very exciting. We are in the middle of this generational shift, and several very prominent members of the art world died recently. One of them is Bob Nuchin, this legendary art dealer and former Goldman Sachs executive, who was kind of an advisor to some of the biggest collectors of today, including Steve Cohen and Mitchell Rales of Glenstone. So his private collection is going to Sotheby's. It's $130 million worth of art. And then another collection, Christie's won the personal collection of legendary art dealer Marion Goodman, who died this year. Her personal collection is estimated at about $60 million and includes paintings by Gerhard Richter, who's been with her gallery for decades and was a personal friend. And so that should get people excited as well.
Could be really key pictured.
Yes. And then, of course, Agnes Gunn's estate is selling just 3 works, major Rothko painting at Christie's. So I think that you see these very seminal people's collections heading to auction. For the intelligence report, I spoke with a source of mine who was an auction executive at very high level. And he told me that he has a list of 85 to 90 people who are still alive, but who are in their final chapter and who he expects in the next 5 years, whose collections are going to come to the market. And he says there's going to be just a crush of these collections. Can the market absorb all of them? Again, reporting the story, some of the biggest, most recurrent names in all this collection, you're talking about Rothko, and you're talking about Twombly, and you're talking about artists who we've seen their markets shrink in the past, let's say a decade, or in the past 5-6 years since the pandemic. So they're at the very high levels price-wise. So what needs to happen to get maybe new buyers excited? I mean, do these estimates need to come down? It's going to be really interesting to watch. Will there be enough appetite to gobble it all up? If this one person has 90 names, I'm sure there's so many more. Just think about it. It's going to be very interesting to watch the space.
Yeah, the Lauder collection we talked about at the beginning could be the first high-profile test of many to come.
But I don't think there are many Lauder's collections.
Right, it was a special. Yeah.
It was very special. And then Paul Allen's collection in 2022, it was such a high, right? Then the market just dropped by comparison a year later. And so the auction houses were like, well, you can't expect, it was once in a generation type of a collection. So obviously it will fall compared to that. So is the Leonard Lauder collection the same? We might see a decline compared to November this year, because it's kind of a magical combination, right? Of a personality, of the impact of person's lives, the legacy, the artwork, and everything around it. I just don't know, as revered as Bob Nugent and Marion Goodman are in the art world, if their name transcends to just like general population. I don't know. We'll see.
Right.
Maybe
We'll see.
we'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But it might be difficult to replicate immediately.
Right. Yeah. And I think your point is such an important one, that when you're looking at these annual totals, you really do have to account for these once in a generation, once in every 10-year collections that come to market. And so as people are reading the intelligence report, look at those price brackets, look at the broader trends that you're identifying, and tune in May when Katya will be in the auction room with other members of Artnet News.
Yeah, with my
reporting.
notebook.
with the notebook, seeing what happens.
Yes.
Thank you, Katya, for coming on. It is always such a pleasure to chat with you, and people can find the Art Detective column usually on Friday, but once a week, usually at the end. Tune in and hope to talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili with contributions from Kate Brown, Ben Davis, Carolyn Goldstein, and Naomi Ray. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.